Imagine standing in a shadowed courtyard, the air thick with smoke and fear. The morning sun barely pierces the gloom, yet the flicker of torches illuminates faces pale with terror. A crowd gathers silently, watching as a young woman is led forward, her head shaved, her hands bound. She is accused, not of theft or rebellion, but of knowledge, of healing, of asking questions, of daring to think. Around her, the instruments of faith gleam, iron chains, the rack, the strappado, each designed to bend body and soul alike. Centuries ago, this was Spain. This was the world of the Spanish Inquisition, where obedience was enforced through terror, and silence was demanded from the innocent and guilty alike. Lives were destroyed not for crime, but for curiosity. Families vanished. Scholars were imprisoned. Children grew up in fear, learning that deviation could mean death. And yet, even in the darkest dungeons, voices persisted. Songs, whispered prayers, secret texts, human defiance burned brighter than any flame. Prepared to step into a world where faith became a weapon, fear was a law, and the legacy of suffering still haunts history. What the Spanish Inquisition did to those accused of heresy will shock you forever. Subscribe now to uncover the hidden truths and hear the voices of the condemned. Imagine a cold night in 16th century Spain. The streets are empty, cobbled stones glistening under the faint glow of torches. A hush presses down over the city, heavier than the darkness itself. In the distance, the monastery bells toll, but they do not call to prayer tonight. They mark fear, warning the citizens that the shadow of the Inquisition has arrived. Every whisper, every creaking door, every footstep could betray a secret. Within the stone walls of the Inquisition, prisoners lie awake on hard, uneven floors. Some clutch rosaries, others weep quietly, but all feel the same thing: dread. They are accused of heresy, of questioning faith, of knowing too much, or perhaps too little. In this world, innocence is fragile. Even a whispered doubt, a neighbor's envy, or a misinterpreted gesture could summon the Inquisitor's attention. And when the Inquisitor arrives, there is no mercy, only methodical, deliberate examination. The cells are cold, damp, and suffused with the smell of mold, sweat, and fear. Chains rattle softly, a sinister lullaby. In the quiet, one can hear the faintest echo of footsteps in the corridor, the slow dragging of iron, the faintest hiss of whispered prayers. Every sound carries meaning. Every silence is loaded with the weight of imminent terror. For those accused, each moment is a question: will they survive? And if they do, what part of themselves will they lose first, body, will, or soul? Outside the walls, society watches. Fear is contagious. Families turn against each other, neighbors cast suspicious glances, and children learn early the price of deviation. The Inquisition does not simply punish the guilty, it teaches the living. Each confession extracted, each trial concluded, serves as a lesson carved into memory: obey, confess, or suffer. The instruments of faith are not merely tools of pain, they are instruments of control, shaping thought and behavior across an entire empire. Inside, the Inquisitors move with measured precision. They are men of the cloth, robed in black, eyes cold yet calm, hands steady. To them, this is holy work. Every question asked, every chain tightened, every bone stretched on the rack is justified by divine law. They believe that through pain comes truth, and through confession comes salvation. And yet, history whispers a darker truth. Often the confessions were lies, whispered to end suffering, to protect others, or to preserve the last shred of dignity in a world that had already stripped much away. Fear is their most powerful weapon. The Inquisitor does not merely threaten the body, he threatens identity, reputation, family, and future. Isolation and darkness are as effective as iron and fire. Days pass like weeks. Hunger gnaws at resolve. Sleep becomes impossible. The mind bends under relentless pressure, producing confessions, false or true, that satisfy the tribunal while condemning the innocent. Every scream echoes off stone walls, every plea disappears into shadows, yet the sound persists. A reminder that in this realm, faith is measured by fear, and obedience is demanded in silence. And yet, even in the darkest chambers, traces of human spirit remain. Some whisper prayers through their tears. Some sing hymns to drown the sound of chains. Some refuse to implicate friends or family, holding on to honor even as the world strips away everything else. In these moments, fleeting as they are, history records not only cruelty but courage, not only oppression but resilience. This is the Spain of the Inquisition, a kingdom bound by faith and fear, where salvation is measured in screams and obedience enforced by instruments perfected through centuries. Every stone in the monastery, every chain, every instrument, every whispered accusation, all converge into a single truth. The shadow of the Inquisition touches every life, and under its gaze, even innocence trembles. And so, as we peer into these shadows, imagine the fear, the tension, and the silent courage. The story of the Inquisition is not only a tale of cruelty but a meditation on power, mortality, and the fragile endurance of humanity itself. The dawn breaks, but the light brings no warmth. The sun rises over a city still heavy with fear, its golden rays touching the same gray walls where countless souls have perished. In the courtyard, the air is thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the distant sound of iron striking iron, the preparation of the instruments of faith. Inside the chambers, the inquisitors begin their daily ritual. The records are opened, ink thick and black as judgment itself. Names are written down, accusations read aloud. Heresy, witchcraft, sorcery, blasphemy, the words are as familiar to the scribes as prayers. Yet each name represents a life about to be unmade. A baker accused by his apprentice. A mother condemned for her herbs. A scholar whose books were found to contain forbidden ideas. The room where confessions are drawn is silent but for the soft murmur of Latin prayers. The accused is brought in, pale, trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. For many, the worst pain is not physical, it is the realization that they have already been judged. The inquisitor watches, expression unreadable, as the prisoner kneels. Questions follow like blows. Do you deny the faith? Who have you conspired with? What did you whisper in the night? When answers falter, other methods begin. The sound of rope tightening, the creak of wood, the low murmur of the assistant's chant. The air fills with dread. The staccato is raised, the prisoner's wrists bound behind their back and hoisted upward until joints pop in sickening rhythm. The inquisitor's voice is calm, deliberate, almost compassionate, as he demands confession. The screams that follow are not of rebellion, but of surrender. And yet the inquisitor calls it mercy. Mercy, he says, for the soul. For pain purifies, confession redeems, and truth, no matter how it is extracted, serves the divine. The prisoner gasps out words, half prayer, half plea. Yes, I confessed. Yes, I spoke the devil's name. The scribe notes it down in ink that never fades. The confession is complete. The soul, in their view, is saved. But in the silence that follows, no one speaks of what is lost: dignity, innocence, humanity itself. By nightfall, the cells are filled once more. Some weep, others stare blankly at the ceiling, their minds fractured by the day's torments. In the corner, a woman hums softly, her voice cracked but steady, an ancient lullaby from her village, a song of home. For a moment it cuts through the gloom, fragile yet defiant. It is in these small acts that humanity clings to life. Outside, the city pretends not to see. The markets open, children play, priests preach obedience from the pulpit. Yet everyone knows someone who vanished, someone whose name was whispered one day and never spoken again. In every home, there is fear of the knock on the door at night, the knock that means the Inquisition has come. The walls may be strong, but rumors travel faster than guards, and every rumor is another chain tightening around the city's throat. The Inquisition does not merely punish the guilty. It teaches society how to fear. The sight of the accused paraded through the streets, barefoot, head shaved, clothed in the yellow robes of penitence, is enough to silence dissent for generations. Children watch in silence. Parents bow their heads. The lesson is clear: obedience is safety. Questioning is death. But beneath that silence, beneath the weight of sermons and chains, a quiet resistance grows. Some priests hide forbidden books. Some scholars flee across borders, taking their ideas with them. Some common folk, bound by love and courage, risk everything to smuggle prisoners from the cells. Their acts go unnoticed by history, yet they form the unseen heartbeat of survival. In the flickering candlelight of the Inquisition's halls, a paradox is born, an empire claiming to save souls by breaking them, a faith that destroys to purify, a silence that hides both guilt and innocence. This is not merely a chapter of cruelty. It is a mirror, showing what humanity becomes when conviction outweighs compassion. And as the night falls once again, the same bells that tolled fear now echo across the city. Somewhere, a door slams. Somewhere, a scream fades into prayer. The machinery of faith grinds on, relentless, mechanical, divine in purpose, and utterly human in its cruelty. The chamber is silent, except for the faint metallic rattle that fills the air. Iron against stone. A whisper of chains swaying gently, like a pendulum marking the passage of despair. In this place, faith has a sound, it echoes. The Inquisitors called it the Chamber of Truth, but to those who entered, it was simply hell. The instruments of the Inquisition were not born of madness, but of precision. Every device was crafted by steady hands and sharpened intent. Each curve of iron, each knot in the rope, each wooden beam had purpose, not only to inflict pain but to create surrender. To make a soul yield not only its secrets, but its will. The rack stands at the center of the room, a wooden frame as ordinary as a table, yet its purpose is unspeakable. The victim lies upon it, wrists and ankles bound, the ropes threaded through wheels that turn slowly, methodically, stretching the body until joints tear and bones separate. The Inquisitor does not scream. He observes. He records. He asks questions in a tone so calm, so practiced, it feels almost merciful, until the wheel turns again. The air smells of oil, iron, and candle wax. Shadows move across the walls as the torches flicker, giving the illusion that the tools themselves breathe. There is the strappado, a cruel simplicity, ropes tied behind the back, lifting the body upward until shoulders dislocate. The taka, a cloth forced into the mouth, drenched with water until the victim feels the terror of drowning again and again. And then the heretic's fork, a small device placed between the breastbone and the chin, ensuring that no one could sleep, speak, or bow their head in despair. But the most terrifying instrument of all was silence. The moment before the first question. The stillness in which the accused could hear their own heartbeat racing, their own breath trembling. The Inquisitors understood something profound. Fear begins long before pain. Anticipation is its own form of torture. Imagine standing in that chamber. The torches hiss. The Inquisitor's boots scrape across the floor. Behind you, the assistant prepares the wheel. You can smell the heat of the iron and the faint scent of incense meant to sanctify what is about to happen. And then you hear it, the question that will decide your fate. Do you deny the truth of the Holy Church? Some broke immediately. Others clung to silence, whispering prayers beneath their breath. But in time, all spoke. Whether by faith or by agony, words were drawn from them like blood. And every confession, no matter how false, became another triumph for the tribunal, another proof that the system worked. The Inquisitors called this justice in service of God. They believed they were saving souls, that suffering purified, that confession cleansed. Yet as the centuries passed, even within the Church, murmurs of doubt began to grow. Could salvation truly require such cruelty? Could pain truly lead to purity? Still, the chambers remained full. And the artisans who built the instruments continued their work, blacksmiths, carpenters, executioners, each perfecting their craft, each believing they served a divine purpose. Some historians say that the Inquisition's devices inspired later instruments of war, the psychology of interrogation, the modern understanding of control through fear. Whether true or not, the connection feels inevitable. Once humanity learns how to break the will, it never truly forgets. The instruments of faith were not only made of iron and rope. They were built upon belief. Upon the conviction that control was necessary, that order was holy, and that pain, when sanctified, could reveal truth. And perhaps that is the most chilling part of all. Because when the human mind accepts cruelty as righteousness, when faith becomes weaponized and justice becomes spectacle, the instruments need no iron at all. The mind itself becomes the rack, and fear becomes the rope that binds it. As the flames of the torches wavered, the walls of the chamber seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the cries that filled the air. The instruments waited like silent beasts, gleaming faintly in the dim light, each one a monument to man's devotion to his own cruelty. The inquisitors called them tools of revelation, yet they revealed far more about those who used them than those who suffered beneath them. The rack was the centerpiece, but it was far from the only terror. The iron boot, heavy, black, and cold, was designed to crush bones beneath its slow tightening. It was not sudden, it was deliberate. Each twist of the screw ground the flesh and bone together until the sound itself became unbearable. Witnesses wrote that even the most devout inquisitors sometimes looked away. But their duty was divine, and divine work demanded sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was humanity. In the corner, the pair of anguish rested in silence, its polished surface deceptively elegant. Once inserted and expanded, it tore flesh with mechanical precision, a grotesque flower blooming in agony. Few survived it, but those who did never spoke again. And perhaps that was the point. The Inquisition did not merely punish, it erased voices. It silenced thought itself. Every instrument had its own rhythm. The whine of the winch, the hiss of heated iron, the sharp intake of breath before the scream. The walls absorbed centuries of such sounds, until the stones themselves seemed to remember. Even when the chamber stood empty, one could almost hear the echoes, faint, ghostly, eternal. Yet amid all this horror, one could not ignore the ritual that cloaked it. Before each session, the Inquisitor prayed. Before each confession, he invoked divine mercy. "May God guide this sinner to truth," he would murmur, as the assistant prepared the straps. The juxtaposition was almost unbearable, faith and torment intertwined, scripture and suffering united in purpose. It was not chaos, it was ceremony. A sacred act performed in shadows. Many victims believed that endurance itself could prove innocence. They refused to confess, even as their bodies broke under the strain. Some whispered verses of the Psalms through clenched teeth. Others stared at the crucifix above them, searching for a glimpse of compassion in the carved wooden face. They found none. But in those moments, something unspoken passed between victim and executioner, a silent acknowledgement that the pain was shared, though for very different reasons. Outside these walls, artisans continued their trade, refining the instruments. The blacksmith's hammer struck like a heartbeat. Iron cooled in water, steam rising like ghostly breath. These men rarely saw the consequences of their craft, yet they knew its purpose. Some justified their work as service to the crown. Others drank in silence, haunted by what they built. The Inquisition reached far beyond the dungeons. It seeped into the hands of those who shaped its tools, into the prayers of those who blessed them, into the dreams of those who feared them. By the late 1500s, the instruments of faith had become both legend and warning. Rumors spread through Europe, of iron maidens, spiked chairs, wheels that turned with blood. Some of these tales were exaggerated, others invented entirely. But all carried the same message, that in Spain, the Church had made pain divine. And though centuries would pass, the myth of those tools would outlive the men who built them. It is said that when the last inquisitorial chambers were sealed, the tools were buried deep beneath the monasteries, not destroyed, but hidden. As if to conceal not merely their form, but the memory of what they represented. Yet memory has a way of surviving. Even today, in museums and old archives, the remnants remain, silent reminders that the line between faith and fanaticism is perilously thin. And as the candles flicker out, the chamber fades into darkness once more. Only the iron remains, cold, eternal, waiting for belief to give it purpose again. Because history has shown us, once humanity learns to sanctify pain, it never truly forgets how to use it. The corridors of the Inquisition were lined not just with chains and iron, but with whispers, fragments of prayers, confessions, and cries that seemed to cling to the walls long after the speakers were gone. Each voice carried its own story, its own truth, its own torment. But when the records were written, those voices were reduced to ink and Latin. Confessus est. He has confessed. The rest was erased. And yet, history still remembers them, in fragments, in legends, in faint echoes that defy silence. One such voice belonged to a woman named Catalina de los Rios, accused of witchcraft. Her crime was simple: she knew the language of herbs, of the earth, of healing. A child in her village fell ill, and when her remedies failed, the people turned on her. She spoke to spirits, they said. She whispered to the night. And that was enough. When she was brought before the inquisitors, her hands were bound, but her gaze remained steady. She confessed to nothing. 4 days they questioned her, gently at first, then cruelly. Still she would not yield. God made the earth, she told them, her voice cracked from thirst. And I learned its secrets to heal, not to harm. The inquisitor looked at her and smiled, not in kindness, but in pity. And yet, he said, you defy his servants. Her trial ended at dawn, as the bells tolled. She was condemned not for what she did, but for what she represented, a woman who possessed knowledge beyond the church's reach. Her name was struck from records. But in the valley where she once lived, people still whisper that flowers bloom on her grave even in winter. Then there was Miguel de Aranda, a scholar from Toledo. He had studied texts forbidden by the church, books from Italy, ideas from the East. He believed that reason and faith could coexist, that understanding the world was another way of understanding God. But in the age of fear, curiosity was treason. When his home was raided, the inquisitors found books bound in foreign script. He was dragged before the tribunal, his eyes hollow, his spirit unbroken. They accused him of heresy, of spreading dangerous thoughts. He tried to defend himself, to explain that knowledge was not rebellion. But the tribunal was not interested in explanations. They demanded repentance. He refused. On the day of his sentencing, he said, "If knowledge is a sin, then ignorance must be a virtue. And that, my lords, is a far greater heresy than any book could teach." Those were his last recorded words. And somewhere in the archives of Seville, a nameless entry remains, a man who would not kneel. But perhaps the most haunting voice came from a child, barely 12. The daughter of a converso family, Jews who had converted to Christianity under threat. She had recited her prayers each morning, just as her mother taught her. But one night she was overheard whispering Hebrew words her grandmother once spoke. A neighbor reported it. By dawn, she and her family were taken. No record remains of her name. Only a note in the tribunal's log. A confession extracted with tears. She was spared the pyre, but her parents were not. Years later, a priest wrote of her in secret, a child who carried the light of both faiths, and was punished for both. These were the condemned. The healers, the thinkers, the doubters, the different. They were the mirrors in which society saw its fears reflected, fear of knowledge, of independence, of difference. The Inquisition silenced them, but it could not silence what they represented, the eternal tension between belief and truth, obedience and conscience. Their voices were meant to fade. Yet even now, centuries later, when one walks the old cathedrals of Spain, when the wind whispers through the cloisters and the bells toll across empty plazas, some say you can still hear them, faint, defiant, unforgotten. Because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to speak. In the dungeons beneath Seville, the air was thick with despair. Damp stone walls wept moisture, carrying the scent of mold, sweat, and human fear. Here, prisoners were stripped of not just clothing, but of identity. Names became numbers. Memories became distant echoes. And yet, even in the absolute darkness, their voices persisted. One evening, a man named Fernando Alvarez, accused of heresy for questioning the infallibility of the clergy, was brought before the tribunal. He was neither violent nor defiant. He was simply curious, inquisitive, a man of letters who had dared to ponder forbidden truths. The inquisitors, seeing the danger in his mind rather than his hands, sought to break him quietly. Hours passed. Questions were repeated. Each answer was met with silence, each silence with torture. The corda, a heavy rope, stretched his arms until joints screamed. Yet his spirit, though battered, refused to bend. Outside, the city lived in constant tension. News of confessions, public penances, and punishments traveled faster than the inquisitors themselves. People whispered of victims who sang hymns under duress, of children who hid sacred texts in attic nooks, of neighbors who disappeared one night and never returned. Fear became invisible architecture, a scaffolding of compliance, built brick by brick through terror. Women bore the brunt of particular suspicion. Isabella de la Cruz, a healer in Granada, knew the art of herbs better than most priests knew their scripture. When illness struck a child, her remedies brought relief, but when a villager died, she was blamed. Accused of witchcraft, she faced the tribunal with courage, though trembling. The inquisitors pressed her for confessions, for names of accomplices she did not have. The strappado awaited her, iron and rope ready to bend body and spirit alike. Yet she sang quietly, a lullaby to soothe the child she could no longer save, and in that act, she preserved a fragment of humanity in a place designed to erase it. Even the smallest voices mattered. The whispers of a servant who witnessed injustice, the plea of a child who feared for her family, the quiet murmur of a scholar hiding a book, all these became part of the tapestry of the condemned. Every story was a thread in the larger narrative of oppression, resilience, and the fragile endurance of conscience. The inquisitors believed that confession was the ultimate form of control, that the extraction of truth, however forced, restored order. But what they could not measure was the weight of what lingered, trauma, memory, fear that stretched across lifetimes. Families were torn apart. Communities watched in silence, learning that survival required complicity, and complicity required silence. And in that silence, the voices of the condemned gained new power, passing their lessons to those who remained. Even in exile, even in secrecy, their stories endured. Manuscripts hidden beneath floorboards, prayers whispered beneath breath, and folk tales told at night preserved knowledge that the Inquisition sought to obliterate. Their voices became immortal, echoing across centuries. They warned, instructed, and inspired, teaching future generations the cost of fear, the danger of unchecked power, and the resilience of the human spirit. As night fell again, the dungeons emptied of activity, the echoes lingered. Every scream, every whispered prayer, every confession, true or false, had carved a permanent mark into the soul of history. The condemned, though silenced in life, spoke louder than the instruments of faith that sought to crush them. And so, the corridors of the Inquisition remain haunted, not only by the echoes of iron and fire, but by the enduring voices of those who refuse to be entirely broken. They remind us, even today, that courage may be quiet, defiance may be unseen, and humanity, though battered, is never truly extinguished. Across the Atlantic, the shadow of the Inquisition stretched far beyond Spain, reaching into the plazas and valleys of the New World. Mexico City, Lima, and Manila, cities alive with commerce and culture, were also cities alive with fear. Here, the instruments of faith were not confined to dungeons or cloisters. They became public spectacle, a lesson carved into the very fabric of society. Imagine the plaza at dawn. A crowd gathers, hushed, tense. The accused is led forward, head shaved, clothed in the penitential garments of yellow and red, symbols of sin and shame embroidered with devils and flames. Priests chant solemnly, reciting psalms meant to purify the soul. Every eye is fixed, every breath held. And above all, the sky is silent, as if it, too, waits for judgment to be rendered. The autos de fe were as ritualistic as they were terrifying. Some were flogged, others imprisoned anew, some burned at the stake, the flames consuming flesh and memory alike. The people watched, some with morbid curiosity, some with quiet horror. The lesson was unmistakable: obedience was survival, and deviation was death. Fear became the currency of daily life. Gossip, envy, and suspicion turned neighbor against neighbor. A misstep, a whispered rumor, a momentary lapse in faith could summon the tribunal's attention. And when it did, there was no escape. Yet beneath the fear, life persisted. Families hid forbidden texts, indigenous healers preserved their rituals in secret, passing knowledge orally from generation to generation. In Mexico, Peru, and the Philippines, quiet acts of defiance became the invisible threads holding culture and identity together. Even in the shadow of the flames, human ingenuity and resilience found ways to endure. A whispered prayer here, a hidden charm there, a coded song sung beneath a parent's breath. These small resistances became lifelines, a testament to the human spirit's unwillingness to be extinguished. The paradox of the empire is stark. Inquisitors believed their cruelty purified and strengthened faith, yet their methods often destroyed the very communities they governed. Lives were lost, families fractured, traditions erased. Fear became the foundation of society, yet in attempting to control thought and behavior, the instruments of faith revealed a deeper truth. Power built on terror may dominate, but it cannot fully conquer. In the colonies, the spectacle of punishment was a lesson writ large. Children witnessed the terror and internalized it. Adults calculated every action, every word, every thought, knowing that a neighbor's report could seal their fate. Society itself became a silent participant in oppression, bound by observation, guilt, and survival instinct. The Inquisitors did not need to reach every hand. The memory of the flame reached further than any arm could stretch. Still, amid terror, traces of courage endured. In the mountains of Peru, shamans continued their rituals in secret. In Mexico, families protected sacred objects, passing them to the next generation. Even in the Philippines, stories of foreign priests' cruelty became folklore, whispered from mother to child. Through these acts, fear was countered by persistence. Knowledge, identity, and culture survived beneath the very shadow meant to erase them. By the late 16th century, the fire had burned across continents, leaving deep scars. The Inquisition had remade societies, imposing obedience through terror, reshaping cultural memory, and suppressing individuality. And yet, the human spirit proved resilient. Amid the ashes, seeds of defiance and endurance persisted, fragile, hidden, but unbroken. The fire of the Inquisition was both literal and symbolic. It represented authority, control, and purification in the eyes of its enforcers. Yet, it also became a mirror, reflecting the limits of power. Empires may burn, chains may bind, and flames may consume, but memory, culture, and spirit find ways to endure, even in the darkest times. The fire did not only burn flesh, it burned ideas, traditions, and entire ways of life. In Lima, a priest recorded the ritualized public punishment of indigenous leaders who had resisted conversion. Their confessions were extracted through careful interrogation and subtle threats. Some gave in, whispering words meant to satisfy the tribunal, while preserving inner truths. Others refused, their defiance recorded as proof of heresy. And when the flames consumed the bodies of the condemned, the plaza was left with an eerie silence, broken only by the crackle of fire and the shuffling of fearful onlookers. Yet even in these moments of horror, human resilience flickered. Families had knowledge, passed it orally from parent to child. A healer might whisper a remedy in the night. A scholar concealed texts beneath floorboards. Songs carried coded messages of survival. These small acts were invisible to the tribunal but monumental in their impact. While the empire sought to impose obedience through fear, culture, memory, and quiet defiance endured beyond the reach of chains and pyres. The fire that purified an empire became a double-edged sword. It demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of fear as a tool of control. Villages and cities trembled beneath its weight, neighbors distrusted neighbors, and every misstep carried the threat of exile, imprisonment, or death. Yet, it also revealed the limits of that power. Knowledge and spirit cannot be entirely destroyed. Even in secret, communities preserved language, ritual, and thought. The Inquisitors could burn the body, but the memory, the ideas, and the hope persisted. Consider the story of Ana de Torres, a young girl in Mexico City, whose family had secretly maintained pre-Hispanic rituals. When discovered, her parents were imprisoned, and she was brought before the tribunal. The inquisitors demanded confession, compliance, and renunciation of all that she had been taught. She was frightened, yes, but not broken. She recited prayers she had learned at home, blending them with the liturgy of the church, creating a space where faith and identity coexisted in quiet defiance. For a brief moment, the inquisitor paused, witnessing a spirit neither extinguished nor fully submissive. Stories like Anna's were repeated in hushed whispers across the colonies. They reminded communities that while the flame of the Inquisition could destroy, it could not completely erase. In the mountains, in the valleys, in hidden rooms and secret gatherings, the human spirit persisted. Fear was real, but endurance was more enduring. Even in Europe, the effects of the colonial Inquisition shaped perception. Travelers, traders, and scholars carried tales of pyres and imprisonment back to Spain and beyond. These stories, both horrifying and heroic, influenced art, literature, and folklore. They became warnings, moral lessons, and reminders of what unchecked authority could achieve, and how resilient humans could be in response. The fire, then, was both destructive and revealing. It exposed the fragility of society under fear, the brutality of absolute power, and the terrifying precision of the instruments of faith. Yet it also revealed human creativity, ingenuity, and resistance. Across oceans and continents, the memory of the condemned persisted, carried not only in whispered tales but in rituals, songs, and secret texts. The fire consumed, yes, but it also illuminated, the human spirit shining, however faintly, against the shadow of tyranny. And so, the Inquisition's reach became not merely a historical fact, but a reflection of human endurance. Across empire and colony, fire and flame, chains and silence, the voices of the oppressed persisted. They remind us that even in the face of overwhelming fear, defiance, quiet, subtle, persistent, is possible. The fire purified, yes, but it could not obliterate memory. It could terrify, yes, but it could not destroy hope. The Inquisition ended centuries ago, yet its shadow lingers. Across Europe and the Americas, tales of its cruelty are woven into folklore, whispered in darkened alleys, and painted on the pages of history. The instruments of iron, the racks, the flames, they are gone from daily life, yet their memory endures, haunting the imagination, a testament to what humanity can inflict when fear becomes sacred. Even the word, which carries the weight of centuries of persecution. Children learned stories of women who healed, who whispered secrets of the earth, and who vanished beneath the shadow of suspicion. Scholars read of men whose curiosity was punished as heresy. Communities tell of families torn apart by rumor, by accusation, by fear made flesh. These stories are not simply horror. They are mirrors reflecting society's capacity for both terror and endurance. Legends grew around these victims, some terrifying, some tragic, some inspiring. In villages across Spain, it was said that women who survived the flames whispered songs that could calm storms. In Mexico, children were told of shamans whose rituals survived in secret, protecting knowledge their oppressors tried to erase. Even in Europe, stories of scholars who smuggled texts, of healers who fled the city under cover of night, became mythic tales of quiet resistance. Fear, though omnipresent, could not fully extinguish life, curiosity, or hope. Yet the myths did more than preserve courage. They also magnified terror. Stories of witches who could curse the Inquisitor, of heretics who returned from the dead, of pyres that smoked through the night. These tales circulated not only as warnings but as reminders of the human cost of fanaticism. They blurred the line between history and imagination, creating a tapestry where memory and legend intertwined. Every story reinforced the lesson learned too late by the living. Unchecked power leaves scars that do not fade. The legacy of the Inquisition extends beyond fear and folklore. It reshaped societies, molding behavior through terror, altering the course of intellectual and cultural history. Entire communities were silenced, knowledge suppressed, and creativity forced underground. The impact of centuries of oppression is difficult to measure, yet it resonates in art, literature, law, and the collective consciousness of nations shaped by these events. And still, amidst the horror, there is resilience. Descendants of the condemned tell stories in whispers and in print, safeguarding memory against erasure. Scholars reconstruct events, seeking to understand what happened, why it happened, and what it reveals about human nature. In this dialogue between past and present, the voices of the condemned are not lost. They speak through history, teaching caution, empathy, and vigilance. The Inquisition, with its flames, chains, and instruments of torture, created a paradox. It demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of fear, yet it could not destroy the very human qualities it sought to suppress. Courage, defiance, ingenuity, and memory all endured. Each whispered tale, each hidden text, each song passed in secret became a thread of resistance, proof that even in the darkest chapters, humanity can persist. Perhaps the most haunting lesson is this: power can inflict suffering, but it cannot obliterate spirit. The myths and legends that survive are not only reminders of terror, but also of endurance. They compel reflection on morality, authority, and the consequences of fear. They teach that even in history's most oppressive moments, hope flickers, memory survives, and voices, though silenced, still speak across centuries. And so, the Inquisition's shadow stretches beyond the reach of time. It is a shadow that reminds, warns, and haunts. A shadow that carries both cruelty and courage, oppression and resilience. And in listening closely to the stories of the condemned, one understands not only the depths of human cruelty, but the enduring strength of the human spirit. Even today, centuries later, the echoes of the Inquisition can be felt. In quiet villages, in old libraries, in the dark corners of forgotten monasteries, the stories survive. They are told not only as history, but as cautionary tales, of how fear can govern a people, of how obedience can be demanded through terror, of how knowledge can be treated as heresy. These stories remind us that the line between faith and fanaticism is fragile, and that power unrestrained can shape generations in silence and dread. The myths born from this era became almost as influential as the historical events themselves. Travelers returning to Europe told of pyres that smoked through entire plazas, of scholars dragged into dungeons for reading forbidden texts, of women accused of witchcraft who disappeared into the night. Each tale carried a warning: deviate, doubt, or question, and suffer. Yet within these tales, the seeds of resistance were often planted. They became lessons not only in fear, but in courage, in survival, in ingenuity. Communities learned to adapt. They hid sacred texts, passed knowledge orally, and developed subtle forms of defiance. A song could carry instructions. A lullaby could encode secret prayers. A child's whispered question could preserve truths that inquisitors sought to erase. The power of human memory, imagination, and defiance ensured that even the most ruthless control could never entirely dominate the mind or spirit. Historians today remind us that the Inquisition's influence was not limited to terror alone. It shaped legal systems, educational norms, and cultural behaviors. Entire societies were molded by fear, with obedience internalized as instinct. And yet, paradoxically, this same fear fueled innovation in secrecy, art, and scholarship, adaptations that allowed culture and knowledge to survive where brute force sought to destroy it. Consider the stories that survived in hidden manuscripts: women recording recipes for medicinal herbs, children memorizing forbidden texts, families teaching languages quietly in the corner of a room. Every act of preservation was a rebellion, and every rebellion, however small, was a triumph of the human spirit over oppression. The flames may have consumed flesh, but they could not consume memory. They may have broken bones, but they could not break conscience. Even legends of ghosts and curses, the so-called vengeance of the condemned, served a purpose. They reminded the living that cruelty leaves a mark beyond the immediate victim, that fear does not vanish with time. These tales, whispered over centuries, preserve both the horror and the humanity of those who lived through it. They are not only stories of suffering, but testimonies of endurance. In reflecting on the legacy of the Inquisition, one cannot ignore its profound lesson. When fear becomes the instrument of authority, societies are shaped in silence, and morality is dictated by coercion. Yet even within that darkness, the resilience of the human spirit shines. Every hidden text, every whispered song, every story passed through generations attests to the endurance of conscience, courage, and memory. The Inquisition may have ended, but its lessons endure. Its shadows teach vigilance. Its legends inspire reflection. And the voices of the condemned, those who suffered, who resisted, who endured, continue to speak across time. They remind us that cruelty, though terrifying, is not absolute, and that even under the harshest oppression, hope persists. And so, as we close this chapter of history, the echoes remain, a haunting, reverent, and solemn reminder of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and courage, for oppression and resilience. The story of the Inquisition is not merely a tale of terror, it is a meditation on power, morality, memory, and the enduring strength of the human soul.